Hey everybody, back again. So we're back to Lucca, Italy. Our sunlit view of the little piazza here. Drawing is probably 2/3, a little bit more done from where I left it first time. What I've done so far, I think you can see, is established a pretty successful dialogue of the lightest lights, here, 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 and the sun squeaking through the buildings, and the darkest darks, which are here, here, starting to be developed there. Everything else in a sort of assembly of mid-tones. So I don't want to over-detail this by any means, but I think it needs just a little bit more identity. So I'm just going to carry on and show you how I would approach this. There is this sidewalk cafe here, obviously, and there's this girl on a bicycle. I've opted to leave her out. I think if I wanted to relocate her, but where she is in the photo, writing off the page, I think is a bit distracting. Doesn't really help. I think if I were doing a more formal painting of this view, I might tend to include her, but if I did, I would reposition it. Right now, it just looks too distracting. And I'm trying to push the viewer's eye back into the painting as much as I can to fall onto the face of this building as it is in dialogue with the face of that building. What I'm doing here now is just finishing up the ground level. I don't want to detail this cafe on the ground, but I want to give it a little bit more identity. Actually, I want to give it a little bit more ambiguity. So just some ideas. Ideas of signage, canopies, chairs, trees without tables, no trees, without actually drawing anything at all. No matter what I paint or draw, I'm always interested in the connections. I talked about the connection of the lights. Obviously, the lights areas don't all touch each other physically. What I'm trying to do is set up a dialogue of untouching objects. So there's the dark and the dark that'll be speaking to each other, and the light. It'll all be interconnected in these two opposite shaped triangles. The most important line, I think, or area, shape, will be the corner of this building in shadow, and also the subsequent corner of this group of buildings over here, also in shadow. These need to be a little more interesting, a little bit more edge-based, to pull away from the background. That helps set up layers of implied distance. If you watched the earlier segment, you watched as I put a little tone on the side of this wall. I'm going to add just a bit more. I think there's a little bit too much of this light that's beginning to pull me out of the drawing, and I don't want that. There's a bit too much real estate. I considered dropping in another window, but I thought it might be distracting. So I'm really just going to tone a lot of that side of the drawing down a little bit more. And then with my soft vinyl eraser, continually try to keep this as untouched and light as I can. As I mentioned earlier, if you want, you can go into an already drawn area and pull out areas of light fairly easily. It will smudge, so be careful, but if you want to add some sense of light in an abstract way, that should work. If you brush your eraser shavings off, be sure to go in the same direction as your pencil marks, if that's important to you. It is to me, because a little bit of smudging will happen and it just tends to pull everything in that same direction, which is what I want. Okay, I think for now that's probably enough. Get the idea. What I'm going to do now is go across the piazza, across the street, and do whatever kind of detail here I'm going to do. I want to emphasize that it is really about detail. It's more about adding sufficient values to get that side and that side to carry equal weight. If anything, the front sides, or the more forward portion of this building, is much forward of that. But I want all the interest of this painting to fall more into the mid-ground. If this is the foreground, that's the closer portion of the mid-ground, background, of course. But so it's the mid-ground where I want the highest contrast. These people against the white building, this shadow against this white building, and these dark buildings, which will tie into the shadow and frame everything, hopefully successfully. It's a good start, but I have a way to go. Again, my vanishing point's about there. I do want to imply some of these windows. I don't have to be that picky about it, but I just want to make sure they're, you know, more or less accurately angled. So with the softer pencil, I'm just going to imply a few windows. I'm going to go pretty wicked dark with that corner because that's up against this light, and it's going to start this dialogue happening. Again, there's a drain pipe that I'm not interested in as an object, but I am interested in it as a shape and another expression of you know, I have a lot of big blocky shapes, so it's nice to introduce a few little more finer filigrees of line work and thinner objects to complement all the big blocky shapes of value. As you can see, I keep jumping back and forth to try to get a nice balance of these darks, but it's yeah, it's working. Other windows, if you look at the photograph, I'm not really trying, again, to duplicate what I'm looking at or to be all that accurate. I'm just trying to get the flavor of that flavor of reality without actually trying to duplicate it in any way. That's not either, for me, it's not desirable and it's not important. I'm always aware we have cameras to literally record what we actually look at. And that I'm always thinking it's my job to interpret that into some sort of emotional reaction. So I've got a hint of a storefront, some windows, shutters, whatever, Italian stuff up above there. It's okay. I think overall that wall could be a bit darker, and I think this is a little boring. It could have some additional bits. I don't want to lose a lot of that white, so I'm going to invent a window that isn't there with one of those shutters that opens from above. Why, you might ask? Because I can just use it to cast a shadow that doesn't exist. That'll help kind of continue this story of these angular shadows. I don't want it too dark. This white on that wall is pretty precious. I don't want to lose it, but I can afford to eat away a little of it, I think. And just apply it. Just as a watercolor. Another free tool is your finger. Don't be afraid to use it. Yeah, I think that helped. Down here, just add some more stuff. I don't know what, road, street signs or texture. Again, I'm very cautious not to eat up too much of the white of that sun-bleached wall. That's pretty important. I can afford to go a little darker, a little crisper on this edge, but I don't really think it needs it too much, and I don't want to go too far, so I'll stop that. Here also I can put in a, of course, all over Italy they have these beautiful lanterns everywhere. As the artist, of course, it's up to you whether you want to include these or edit them out. I'm just adding it here because, like the drain pipes, it's just a little bit of filigree that I think will help make the drawing a little bit more interesting and hopefully a little bit more sophisticated than just these big blank shapes everywhere. Again, no need to go too crazy on that, but just to imply it. I want this wall as it meets the light to be pretty dark. I'm going up and down with the pencil, you can see here, only because I want to try my best to maintain that dark edge against the light edge. Feather it out, and then I can go back to my maniacal angled lines here. These little things start to appear, and I know I mentioned this in the first segment, but if you like them, you can play them up and make them part of the finished work. And if you don't like them, it's easy enough to just sketch over them and make them go away. I do think it could be considered a bit of a gimmick. So just like in a watercolor, a few gimmicks are plenty. It quickly becomes apparent, I think, to the artist when your painting or your drawing starts to look too gimmicky. So you want to back off that. A little goes a long way, is what I'm saying. There's a whole row of these beautiful street lanterns. I'm not altogether sure how many of these I want to include or need to. I just want to break this wall up with really a more abstract pattern of shapes within the dark. The whole thing needs to tie together and hang together as a single shape. So I don't want to get overly detailed. There are these beautiful arches, which I don't have to put in, but I think I'll imply one or two of them just to have something to work with. I'm getting very near the front edge of the drawing, and I don't want, it's actually the corollary between, I don't want the light here to pull the viewer out of the painting. No, I don't want the dark here to pull the viewer out of the drawing this way. So I don't want as much contrast on this edge as I do here. So all these shapes can be less distinct, less defined, less refined. So there you can see, I'm just implying some details without really specifically drawing anything. Obviously up above, there's a whole series of windows and shutters and wires and God knows what. I'm not even looking at the photo, I'm just going to imply something going on up there. The leading edge I want to be the darkest, just as in my watercolors. I talk a lot about that in my classes. If you want a shape to read as dark, if the leading edge up against the light reads dark, you can get away with a lot of light within that shape, and the whole thing will still read quite dark. In fact, I think even more effectively so than if you made it all jet black. That funny noise you might hear in the background is not me grunting, it's my dog Otis snoring. He's not interested, evidently. So I'm just intuitively adding some texture and stuff. These aren't real things. I'm just playing up with some of those diagonals and adding some extra marks to give some character to this wall, again, so that the viewer's eye can sort of fill in the blanks, and you can imagine what's going on back in those shades and shadows without literally having to see it all. Same thing over here. I'm just going to use some of the diagonals that happened intuitively. Play some up, play some others down. Darken some, lighten others if I think they need it. In the actual scene, there are people that could be here, obviously. There are bicycles and things that could be here. I'm not so sure how much of all that's needed, very little. The story of this painting is all here. It's this dark wall against the light background. Meeting this light wall against the dark shadow. So that's the story of the painting. Anything that happens up here would not be wrong, but would run the risk of pulling the viewer's attention out. Just the same as anything that happens up here might not be wrong, but you run the risk of pulling the viewer's attention up out of the drawing that way. So I'm talking to myself as much as you, but trying to caution myself not to do too much. Just as in a watercolor and a drawing, often the hardest thing to know is when you're done. And also, just as in a watercolor, often when you start to hear that little voice inside your head say, oh, maybe it just needs one more, then probably you should start to think about quitting. I think it could use little hints of some people here in the shadows, perhaps. I don't want to over detail them, but I'm going to add a couple of just tops of some people as if they're coming in or going out of some of these stores. And just fade them out into the shadowy darkness below. Same thing over here. There is this really busy, fantastic little restaurant. So I'll just imply some people sitting at a table with really just some scruffy dark marks, no detail at all, really no need. Just so you get the idea. Then I can assess where I am. I think it's okay. I would say this mom and her kid are a little bit focal. They're walking right into the center of focus, so they deserve a little bit more attention maybe, meaning that I'm going to make them just a little darker against that background. That helps. And I keep darkening the edge of this wall, but I think it needs to be ever so slightly darker still to pull it away from the mid-tone background there. Lastly, again, I think the edge of this building against that light background could afford to be just a little darker. It's a little bit more value there. And then the shadow against the bright piazza could stand a little bit more character. Oh yes, you can mess around with the drawing until it's absolutely overworked and ruined. Yes, there are erasers, but there's only so much you can erase. So I think what I'm saying is that for the nature of this drawing, which is intended to be, pretty straightforward and impressionistic, that I have reached the end. And I hope you got something out of it. The point here was to take the view, to figure out what's the story of the view, as I do on all my paintings. What did I like? What inspired me to want to paint or draw this? What I liked was the big blocky angularity of the man-made shapes as it interacted the atmospherics of the light, the sky, the sun, the shadows, and how to interpret that into a reasonable piece of art. The black and white photo helped, taught me more about it as a composition of values. It started to tell me where I wanted my darkest, my lightest, and my midtones. And then in the drawing, I interpreted that one step further into this. So again, you're drawing on a flat sheet of paper. So if you modulate your values and modulate your areas of contrast, you can set up that sense of depth and perspective in your work without having to worry too much about all these mathematical constructions of perspective lines, which I am happy to talk about, and I will. Anyway, thanks guys for watching, and I'll be back with more later. Hope you're well. Stay safe.